The 3-year crackdown on illegal finance. Is the CCP once again trying to wipe out private finance? This is Jersey News commentary. In recent days, Chinese authorities have suddenly and loudly launched a 3-year campaign, the so-called overall battle to prevent and crack down on illegal financial activities. State media and self-media alike are almost unanimously applauding it, using highly uniform language, purifying the market environment, protecting investors, and preventing systemic financial risks. At first glance, this appears to be yet another long-overdue correction, but is it really a correction? Officials claim this is a shift from special rectification campaigns toward normalization, institutionalization, and standardization. This statement is neither logical nor reasonable. If it is truly institutionalized, why must it still be rectified in a normalized way, and why does it take 3 years to achieve normalization? This reveals that the long-familiar campaign-style governance mentality has resurfaced. It is the same formula, the same pattern. In my view, the CCP's 3-year crackdown aims to achieve at least 6 objectives. First, using the name of cracking down on illegality to confiscate all financing channels outside the system. The official wording is an overall battle to prevent and crack down on illegal financial activities, to be carried out over 3 years starting in 2026, featuring full-chain governance and normalization, institutionalization, and standardization. Notice the use of the term overall battle, a distinctly military expression. The tone is unmistakably aggressive. So-called full-chain and normalization mean that the target is not merely fraudsters, but the entire ecosystem of finance outside the state system, from funding sources, platform entry points, and information dissemination, to intermediaries, promotion channels, and local enforcement mechanisms. Nothing will escape. This brings to mind the P2P wipeout 10 years ago. At the time, P2P lending indeed experienced explosive growth and was riddled with scams and bad debts. Regulatory intervention was justified, but the final result was not the creation of a transparent and compliant small loan market, it was the complete elimination of the entire P2P industry. Public data shows that more than 10,000 platforms were once launched, with about 5,000 operating at peak, and an annual transaction volume of roughly 3 trillion renminbi. By mid-November 2020, the number of operating platforms had fallen to 0. This demonstrates that the CCP's approach to private finance is not identify problems, establish rules, retain compliant actors, eliminate illegal ones, but rather identify problems, define them as risks, clear them out, entirely remonopolize financial entry points. What it truly fears is not bad platforms, but the emergence of a financing network outside the state financial system, one capable of matching capital independently and bypassing banks and administrative approval. This 3-year crackdown is likely a repeat of the P2P logic, expanded to cover private financing, private wealth management, gray local financing, online capital schemes, cross-regional financing networks, even mutual aid or community-based capital flows. Second, preemptively cutting off financial incidents that could evolve into collective rights defense movements. Officials emphasize striking early and small and moving the governance threshold forward. On the surface, this is risk prevention. In reality, it is political prevention. What they fear is not the financial scheme itself, but what happens after it collapses, victims forming groups, cross-regional coordination, collective rights defense actions, eventual transformation into social stability incidents. The Hunan Rural Bank scandal is a perfect example. In 2022, several rural banks in Hunan faced withdrawal restrictions. Authorities later claimed that the bank's online systems had been manipulated by Hunan New Fortune Group. When depositors across the country attempted to travel to Hunan to defend their rights, authorities assigned them red health codes, effectively confining them to their homes and preventing movement, triggering widespread outrage domestically and internationally. Therefore, the full-chain governance of this campaign is not just about capital flows, but also crowd formation, information flow, collective action. It seeks to eliminate every node before financial products scale up. Victims organize. Public opinion spreads. This is why officials stress propaganda, interagency coordination, local enforcement systems, and involvement of police and judiciary. Financial regulation is merely the shell. The core is the securitization of financial risk into a stability maintenance operation. This sends a clear signal. The social spillover of China's financial crisis is highly likely. Remember this. Third, turning financial licensing into a monopoly of power and forcing capital back into the state system. Officials repeatedly emphasize industry policy, long-term mechanisms, and full coverage. In essence, this redraws the boundaries of financial permission, who can raise funds and who cannot. Who can absorb capital and who cannot. Who can act as intermediaries and who cannot. In short, build a fortified state financial wall, eliminate private finance, and ensure monopoly dominance. This recalls the crackdown on internet platforms and the halting of Ant Group's IPO. At the end of 2020, China's platform economy faced heavy regulation. Alibaba was fined 18.2 billion renminbi. Meituan and others were penalized. Ant Group's IPO was halted. Jack Ma was forced to publicly state that Ant Financial and Alipay could be handed over to the state. To be fair, the platform economy did have problems: monopoly practices, data abuse, excessive leverage. But the CCP's response was not to build predictable regulatory frameworks, it was to launch a political campaign against disorderly capital expansion and push private platforms out of the market. The essence of the Ant case is simple: the CCP cannot tolerate a private entity controlling payment infrastructure, massive credit data, consumer finance, lending networks, and capital flows. Because this would shift financial power outside the party-state system. Jack Ma's speech criticizing the pawnshop mentality of traditional banks and declaring if banks don't change, we will change them was deeply provocative to the leadership. Thus, regulation was not about correction. It was about seizing back financial power. This 3-year crackdown follows the same logic: any financing activity not licensed, monitored, or priced by the state will be labeled illegal and eliminated. Fourth, politicizing economic problems and destroying the market's self-correcting capacity. The CCP's habitual method is, take a legitimate issue, expand it, politicize it, turn it into a campaign. The double reduction crackdown on private tutoring is the most typical case. Problems existed: excessive profit-seeking, heavy burdens on parents, education anxiety. But the solution was force all academic tutoring institutions to become non-profit and subject fees to government control. The result: the entire industry was effectively destroyed. Companies shut down or transformed. Stock prices of listed firms like New Oriental collapsed by over 95%. Yet the issue could have been addressed through regulating advertising, controlling fees, limiting prepayments, restricting capital speculation, improving public education. Instead, the CCP chose brute administrative force. Why? Because the tutoring industry had become a vast social network linking teachers, students, parents, capital, platforms, and institutions beyond full state control. Thus, an education issue was elevated to education sovereignty, capital disorder, national security. And the industry was sentenced to death. The same logic applies to 3-year crackdown. Once private finance forms a network, it becomes a parallel system of capital, people, information, and credit, and that is precisely what the CCP fears. Fifth, replacing accountability with one-size-fits-all crackdowns, protecting the real creators of risk. The most typical example is the 3 red lines policy in real estate. High leverage was indeed a problem. But after the policy was introduced in 2020, financing for developers was abruptly cut off. Liquidity crises emerged rapidly. Major firms like Evergrande collapsed. But who created the bubble? Local governments selling land. Banks expanding credit. Monetized shantytown redevelopment. Shadow financing via Algia fees. GDP-driven promotion incentives. When the crisis hit, the narrative became high leverage by developers, disorderly capital, overheated markets. Thus, the system transformed itself from co-conspirator into judge. The same will happen in this campaign. Private finance will be blamed for risks that were actually produced by systemic failures such as credit discrimination, fiscal pressure, and state-dominated finance. Sixth, using power to manufacture social disasters. The 3-year zero-COVID disaster is the clearest example. Pandemic control had legitimacy at the start, but under Xi Jinping's personal command, it became an extreme political campaign. What followed? Prolonged lockdowns, economic paralysis, loss of individual rights, massive social and economic damage. Then, abruptly, it was abandoned. This is the pattern: begin with a legitimate goal enforced through political campaigns, end with devastating costs. Precision control became nationwide lockdown. Life first became power first. Dynamic zero became social and economic zero. The 3-year crackdown could follow the same trajectory: start with illegal finance, expand to all non-licensed activity, escalate into local over-enforcement. The result: economic stagnation and accelerated systemic decline. Conclusion. In one sentence, the CCP always takes a legitimate pretext, then expands, politicizes, and weaponizes it. Over decades, nothing has changed. Only the labels and slogans have changed. This is not a campaign against illegal finance. It is a campaign against the free flow of capital. It is not about improving markets. It is about reclaiming them. Not reducing risk, but hiding it. Not protecting investors, but controlling money and people. In this system, any problem can become a reason. Any sector can be targeted. Any space of economic freedom can be eliminated. I am convinced this 3-year crackdown will not be the last.